Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are tackling a topic that I think has a serious branding problem. You hear the word options, and for most people, myself included, honestly, the brain immediately jumps to, complex calculus, all the Greeks and guys screaming on a trading floor. It feels impenetrable.
Oh, absolutely. That is the most common reaction we see. It's the boogeyman of the SIE for a lot of people. They see options on the syllabus and they panic.
But looking at the source material we have today, it's Lesson 9 from the SIE curriculum, Fundamentals of Option Contracts. I was struck by how little math is actually in the sort of the foundational definition. The source makes a pretty bold claim right at the start. This isn't about math, it's about law. It's about contracts.
That's the absolute key to unlocking it. If you could just strip away all the flashing screens and the noise, an option is just a legal agreement between two people. That's it. One person buys a right, and the other person sells their freedom of choice in exchange for cash. That's the core of it right there. It's a contract.
And that is exactly what we are going to unpack. Our mission today is to decode the regulator mindset on this. We need to get why the SIE exam and the regulators treat them like financial power tools. Useful, but capable of cutting your hand off if you aren't paying attention.
That is a really, really good way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about having respect for the instrument.
So before we dive in, I do want to take a quick second to talk to you, our listener. If you are enjoying these SIE study deep dives, please subscribe, like, and comment. Tell us which SIE topics you want us to look at next, or just let us know where you tuned in from. We really love seeing that. It supports the channel and helps us reach more learners. And just remember, this is part of a full SIE playlist that covers the entire approach. Listening to the whole series really is the best way to get ready. These things build on each other.
Absolutely. Context is everything with this exam.
Okay, so let's set the stage. The text starts by defining what an option is by first telling us what it is not. And it's very clear that an option is not equity and it isn't debt.
Right. First and foremost, it's a derivative. And I know that word scares people, but it just means its value is derived from something else. So if you buy an option on Apple stock, you don't own Apple. You don't get a dividend. You don't get to vote. You just own a contract that tracks the price of Apple.
So if I'm not buying the stock and I'm not lending money like a bond, what am I actually buying?
You're buying time and choice.
Time and choice. I like that.
Yeah, you're entering a contract that gives you the right to either buy or sell a specific stock at a specific price within a specific window of time.
That brings us to the first major concept here, and honestly, the most interesting part of the source material, the asymmetry of the deal.
Yes, this is crucial. If you miss this, you miss everything about options.
Usually when I buy something, let's say a car, I give you money, you give me the car, we walk away equal, right, the deal's done. But options don't work like that. The source describes this like fundamental imbalance.
It's completely lopsided. In every single option contract, you've got two sides, the buyer and the seller. And in the industry, we'll often call the buyer the holder and the seller the writer. And they live in two totally different realities.
Okay, let's look at the buyer's reality first. What does their world look like?
The buyer is the one with all the power. They pay a premium up front, that's the cash it costs, and in exchange, they get a bargain.
Right.
They were in the driver's seat. They can choose to use that contract, or they can choose to just let it expire worthless. They have options, literally.
And the seller?
The seller's the one who took the cash. But for that cash, they took on a burden. They have the obligation. If the buyer decides to make a move, the seller must perform. They have no choice in the matter anymore. They sold that choice.
This is why the language is so specific. We have 4 scenarios in the matrix the source gives us, and I want to walk through them because this is where it gets a little slippery. We have calls and we have puts.
Let's just simplify the definitions first. A call is about buying the stock. A put is about selling the stock. Think call up, put down.
Okay, so let's put that together with rights and obligations. Scenario 1, I buy a call.
Okay, so you're the holder. You have the right. And since it's a call, you have the right to buy the stock at the agreed-on price. You're betting the price goes up.
I want to lock in a low price now to buy it cheap later.
Exactly.
Scenario 2, I sell a call.
Now you're the writer. You have the obligation. You are obligated to sell the stock to the buyer if they ask for it. You're betting the price stays flat or, goes down.
So you can just keep the premium and nothing happens.
That's the goal for the seller.
Okay, scenario 3, I buy a put.
You're the buyer again, so you have the right. A put is about selling. So you have the right to sell the stock at that locked-in price. This is your big short moment. You think the market's going to crash. So you pay for the right to sell your stock high, even if it goes low.
And the last one, scenario 4, I sell a put.
You're the seller. You have the obligation. You are obligated to buy the stock if the holder forces you to.
It really, really helps to see it as a power dynamic. Buy equals sell equals obligation.
If you can just anchor yourself to the buyers have rights, sellers have obligations, you're honestly going to get half the options questions right on the SIE without even touching a calculator.
Speaking of math, there is one multiplier we have to mention: standardization. When I see an option price listed as, say, $5, I can't just pay $5.
No, and please don't try that. Standardized options almost always cover 100 shares. That's the contract size. So if the premium is listed as $5, your actual cost is 5 times 100, $500.
And that multiplier is a classic exam. Gotcha. You have to remember to multiply by 100.
Always. Every single time.
Okay, let's shift to the mechanics, the valuation. We know what they are, but how do we know what they're worth? The source breaks the premium down into two parts: intrinsic value and time value. Intrinsic value feels logical.
It's the here and now value. It's simple. Just ask yourself, if I exercise this option right this second, would I make money?
Okay, so give us an example. I have a call option to buy Apple at 150. That's the strike price. And Apple is trading right now at 170.
Then you have $20 of intrinsic value per share. You can buy at 150, immediately sell at 170, and you pocket the difference. We call that being in the money.
But what if Apple is at 140?
Well, why would you use the option? Why buy at 150 when you could just get it on the market for 140? You wouldn't. So the option has zero intrinsic value. It's out of the money.
But, and this is the key thing, even if it's out of the money, the option still costs something. It's not free.
Exactly. And that extra cost, that's the time value. This is the price of maybe. It represents the time left until it expires and how much the stock is expected to bounce around. You're paying for the chance that Apple might jump from 140 to 200 before your contract is up.
And this brings us to a concept that I think is kind of poetic but painful for the buyer: time decay.
Yeah, the source calls options wasting assets, which is a very specific and kind of depressing term.
It reminds me of buying a bag of salad. You buy it on Sunday with good intentions, but the clock starts ticking the moment you leave the store.
That is a perfect analogy. An option is exactly like a bag of salad. Every single day that passes where the stock doesn't move your way, a little bit of that time value rots away. It wilts.
And time is the enemy of the buyer.
Absolutely. But that means...
Time is the friend of the seller.
Correct. If you sell an option, you are the grocery store. You already got your money up front. Now you're just hoping the clock runs out so the obligation just vanishes. The seller loves the passage of time.
That dynamic is the perfect lead-in to the risk profiles. This is where the SIE exam really, really focuses, isn't it? The difference between losing a little and losing, well, everything.
Limited versus unlimited risk. Yeah, these questions are guaranteed to show up, and it all goes back to that asymmetry we talked about.
Okay, let's start with the buyer. I buy a call. What's my worst-case scenario?
You bought the salad, it went bad, you lose the premium you paid. That's it. You can't lose more than what you put in. Your risk is limited.
Okay, that's safe. I can live with that. Now let's flip it. I sell a call.
Now you're in the danger zone. And we have to make a distinction here that the source hammers home. Are you naked or are you covered?
Let's talk about the naked call first. I mean, it just sounds risky.
A naked call means you sold someone the right to buy stock from you at a certain price. But you don't actually own that stock. You are completely exposed.
So I promised to sell you Apple at 150, but I don't have any Apple shares in my account.
Right. And then tomorrow, Apple announces they've cured aging and the stock goes to $1,000 a share. The person who bought that call from you says, okay, I'd like my shares at 150, please.
And I have to go into the market and...
You have to go buy them at $1,000 just to
right.
hand them over for 150. You just lost $850 per share. But here's the real kicker. What if the stock goes to 10,000 or 100,000?
A stock price has no ceiling, theoretically.
Exactly. It can go to infinity, which means your loss can be
unlimited.
Selling a naked call is the single riskiest position you can take in the market, period. You have a capped profit, the tiny premium you collected, and infinite downside.
That is genuinely terrifying. Why would anyone ever do that?
It's a high-level strategy, but there is a much safer way to be a seller, which is the covered call.
So how does that change the math?
In a covered call, you own the stock before you sell the option. You already have the shares. So if the stock moons and you get called on, you just hand over the shares you already own. You miss out on all that extra profit, sure, but you don't have to go buy super expensive shares on the market. Your risk is no longer unlimited.
Okay, so to drill this in, buying options equals limited risk. Selling naked calls equals unlimited risk. Selling covered calls is limited risk, but you also cap your upside.
You nailed it. That's the grid.
Okay, we've painted a picture of auctions as these decaying, risky, complex things. Why do people even use them? The source gives two main reasons: hedging and speculation.
Right. Hedging is the responsible adult use of options. Think of it like insurance.
The source specifically points to buying a put for this.
Yeah. Imagine you spent your whole life building a big stock portfolio. You're worried about a recession. You don't want to sell everything and pay all those taxes, so you buy puts.
And this gives me the right to sell at today's high prices, even if the market crashes tomorrow.
Exactly. You pay a premium, just like an insurance premium,
Yeah.
and if the market tanks, the profit you make on the put helps offset the loss on your stocks. You're hedged.
And then on the other end, we have speculation. This is where we talk about leverage.
Ah, leverage. This is why people get so excited about options. It's the ability to control a huge amount of stock value with just a tiny amount of cash.
Run the numbers for us.
Okay, so a stock is $50 a share. To buy 100 shares, you need $5,000. But you could buy one call option controlling those same 100 shares for maybe $200?
So for 200 bucks, I'm controlling $5,000 worth of stock.
Yes. And if the stock goes up to 55, a 10% gain, your $5,000 investment makes you 500 bucks. Not bad. But that $200 option, it might jump to $700 or $800 in value. You could make a 300 or 400% return.
But leverage cuts both ways.
It's a massive double-edged sword. If that stock drops just a little bit, your $200 option can go to zero instantly. You can lose 100% of your money on a tiny market dip.
And that volatility, that potential for total or even unlimited loss, is why the regulatory ecosystem is so strict. The source really goes into detail about suitability.
This is that regulator mindset again. FINRA and the SEC know these things are flamethrowers.
Yeah.
You don't just hand a flamethrower to a toddler, you know.
So what does that look like? I can't just open an app and start selling naked calls.
You absolutely shouldn't be able to. Broker-dealers have to do their homework. They have to ask about your net worth, your experience, your goals, if you're a retired person looking for capital preservation.
Then selling naked calls is
Totally unsuitable. A broker who lets that happen is violating their duty. The exam loves to test that mismatch. They'll give you a conservative investor profile and ask if they should be speculating with options. The answer is almost always a hard no.
Got it. Before we wrap, two quick technical things. American versus European style options. This isn't about geography, is it?
No, don't look at a map for this one.
Oh,
It's all about timing. American-style options are what we use for most individual stocks. They're flexible. You can exercise them at any time before they expire.
American equals anytime.
Exactly. European-style options are rigid. You can only exercise them on the expiration date itself, not before. You usually see this for index options.
And finally, holding this whole chaotic system together is the OCC.
The Options Clearing Corporation, the unsung hero of the whole market. They are the universal counterparty to every trade.
Why does that matter so much?
Well, think about that unlimited risk guy. If he goes bankrupt because the stock went to the moon and you were on the other side of that trade, you'd be out of luck. You'd never get your money. The OCC steps into the middle of every single trade. They guarantee the contract. If the seller goes bust, the OCC pays the buyer.
So they eliminate counterparty risk. I don't need to trust the person I'm trading with. I just need to trust the OCC.
Precisely. The market couldn't exist without them.
Okay, we have covered a ton of ground. From rights versus obligations to the terror of unlimited risk. Let's boil this down into a quick cheat sheet for the exam.
Let's do it.
Point 1, the power dynamic.
Buyers have rights, sellers have obligations. Buyers pay the premium, sellers collect it.
Point 2, the risk.
Buying is always limited risk. Selling naked calls is unlimited risk. That is the most dangerous trade.
Point 3, the why.
Speculators use options for leverage. Investors use puts for hedging, for insurance.
And point 4, the regulator's view.
Options are wasting assets. They require strict suitability checks. Not everyone gets to play in the sandbox.
I want to leave everyone with one final thought. The big so what here.
I think it comes down to this. Financial markets are usually designed to be fair, but options are designed to be precise. The regulator mindset isn't just about saying no. It's about making sure you understand what you're getting into. Those disclosure documents you have to sign are long and scary for a reason.
Hmm.
They want you to know that while stocks are about participating in a company's growth, options are purely about pricing risk. And if you're on the wrong side of that price, the market is not going to be forgiving.
It's a direct transfer of risk. And you better know if you're the one holding it or the one getting rid of it.
Exactly.
Well, speaking of risk and complex structures, the source material actually teases our next deep dive. We're moving away from derivatives into the world of alternative investments.
Well, the fun stuff.
Yeah.
REITs and direct participation programs.
Real estate investment trusts, limited partnerships. These are fascinating because they deal with liquidity, or really the lack of it, and tax rules that are just totally different from what we just discussed.
It's a completely different playbook.
I can't wait. But that is all for today. If you found this deep dive helpful, please subscribe, like, and comment. Tell us what other SIE topics you want us to look at, or just let us know where you're listening from. It really does support the channel. And I'll remind you one last time, this is part of a full SIE playlist. Listening to the whole series is the absolute best way to prepare.
Good luck with the studies.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.